Okay, Marisa, let's start. Excellent. So welcome to Integrated Education and Training 101, Back to Basics. I'm glad to have you all here today, and hopefully you have a lot of great questions for our session. Let's start with some introductions. My name is Brad Hasskamp. I'm the State Adult Education Director at the Minnesota Department of Education. My pronouns are he, him.
And I'm Julie Dincau. I'm the Adult Basic Education Transition Specialist, and my pronouns are she, her.
Excellent. And Julie and I are really excited to provide a lot of this information. And one of our key goals today is to identify that, making sure that you can identify those key components of integrated education and training, that you can describe the value of the IET delivery model, and also that you can articulate the process, including locating the approval form, completing the form appropriately for IET approval here in the state of Minnesota. And that you also will be able to locate resources to support the development of IET. I would also say one of our key objectives is to make sure that your questions get answered. So as you have questions today, we want to make this interactive. We want to make sure that your questions get answered. So please share your questions and we will address them throughout the session. So do not hold back with your questions. I will just quickly put a caveat to those questions though. We will not be able to, if you tell us like in 3 minutes, like, oh, we're doing this in our programming, is that IET? Because that gets to be a little bit more detailed than a quick 2-minute synopsis can provide. So we won't be able to self-diagnose if your programming is IET, but we hope to answer any other questions that you might have. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
Thank you, Brad. And again, welcome everyone. And I think we had some great questions at the opening, so just keep asking them. Again, just a reminder that integrated education and training can be a part of an adult career pathway. Or if you're offering integrated education and training, let me put it this way, it must fit into an adult career pathway. But an adult career pathway does not have to have IET. So this is, again, the career pathway definition piece from our federal office. And there will be a link in the chat to a checklist. It's called the adult, or I believe they just call it the career pathway checklist. That is a tool to help you determine if you have a full adult career pathway. Now that's just the adult career pathway. But if we focus on letter D, one component of that adult career pathway is integrated education and training. And it says includes as appropriate education offered concurrently with and in the same context as workforce preparation activities and training for a specific occupation or occupational cluster. So with that, we'll move and dig in a little further into integrated education and training and what are the components. So integrated is what you see before you is a federal definition. And so they call it a service approach. So that is what integrated education and training is, a service approach to doing things. And it provides adult education and literacy activities concurrently and contextually. And adult basic education in Minnesota has and continues to be fantastic about providing contextual education for learners. It also includes workforce preparation, and we'll go into a little more detail about that because when people read workforce preparation activities, immediately I think what they think of, and I did too, is like, oh, resume writing and job interviews, like prepping for a job interview. It goes a lot deeper than that, than just those activities. Those are two activities you can do, but it's broader and deeper, if that makes sense. And then finally, the final component is workforce training for a specific occupation or occupational cluster for the purpose of educational and career advancement. So on the next slide, you can see how these three buckets are kind of laid out in integrated education and training. So the first one, the first component is adult education and literacy. And I look at this as sort of our bread and butter. This is what we have done for years, since the 1960s, when this adult ed was put into place. We've offered adult education, literacy classes, English language, family lit, English language, and civics prep. We've been doing that for years and years and years. So then what's new in 2014 with the new federal law, they created something called workforce preparation. This isn't new content. We've been doing this as well for several years. In fact, Atlas created the ACEs TIF. ACEs is academic, career, and employability skills. And then the TIF is transition integration framework. And together they came up with a set of skills that every learner in adult basic education should work on developing to become employed. And that was a request that came from employers to the adult basic education state team. Some of you may remember Barry Schaefer, our former director, and he asked that we develop something. So that's ACEs TIF, and it's become very nationally known and nationally recognized as a great framework to build these skills in. But as I said, it's not just resume writing, and it's not like preparing for an interview. It's critical thinking, it's digital literacy, it's self-management and employability skills. And there's a lot that can be covered in this area. But when you think of workforce preparation, it's a lot. Digital literacy is just in and of itself a huge component, but then you have to build in all the other pieces as well. So we have our basic adult basic education plus our workforce preparation activities. And then the third piece is training or workforce training. And in Minnesota, we traditionally have done like the occupational skills training piece, like we do certified nursing assistant or preparing for a parapro exam or preparing for a certified CDL. Those are pretty common certificates that are delivered through several ABE consortiums across the state. But you can also do on-the-job training, incumbent worker training, pre-apprenticeship, and customized employer-sponsored education and training. And those have all been done in Minnesota to various extents. So I would say in the early 2000 to 2010, I think we saw a lot more incumbent worker training and workplace training. Then it kind of went away and we saw more work being done with customized training at the community colleges. And now we are focused, we see more of the occupational skills training provided with trainers that may or may not be connected to our two-year public community colleges and technical colleges. So those are the three components that would make up an integrated education training kind of program. Next slide, please. So concurrent and contextualized are two very important features of this definition. And it really can make the difference between what a bridge program is and what integrated education and training is. So it has to be, each area has to be of sufficient intensity and quality, all right? and it's designed to improve like our math, reading, and basic skills. So the intensity and quality really is focusing on, you cannot have 15 minutes of basic skill teaching and then move into 45 minutes of training. It really needs to be integrated. It needs to be concurrent, and it needs to be contextualized together. They occur simultaneously or at the same time, and they use occupationally relevant instructional materials. So those are just 3 pieces. I think we've done a lot of using relevant instructional materials. I think we could do more with it. These are important because this is what engages the learner. We have a bit of a retention problem with many of the learners we serve. I think, and Brad, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but the average amount of time that a learner will stay in adult basic education is about 70 hours. So think of that, that's 2 weeks of full time attending something. We want to get them up to at least 12, well, at least through a credential, at least like 12 weeks and a credential, so that when they leave, they're leaving with something in hand, and they can come back. We're opening the doors to say, if you exit with the credential, and remember, you can come back and stack that credential up, and we'll help you with that as well. So those are the three points around concurrent and contextualized. But then the other big piece, and particularly in Minnesota, this has been difficult to do, is a single set of learning objectives. And the reason this has been difficult to do is what was pointed out at our welcome is that it's harder in Minnesota to work with between ABE and the community colleges because we're in 2 different systems. And whereas like the IBEST and some of the other states, it's easy to pull together 2 instructors that are working within the same system than it is to pull together 2 instructors that are working in separate systems, where one has to follow the rules of a school district or a community-based organization, and the other has to follow the rules of a contract through Minnesota State. And they may not have prep time, or they may not have time where they can dedicate to working with an adult basic education instructor to create a single set of learning objectives. And really, that single set of learning objectives need to be designed together. They don't have to be if you're delivering a course that is delivered by an ABE instructor, but let's just say you're delivering welding, then that would require like an ABE instructor and a welding instructor working together to create the single set of learning objectives. If it's adult basic education and they're going to offer a food manager, food safety, or a parapro, and that ABE instructor is trained on the vocational skills there, they can write the basic and vocational skills together for a single set of learning objectives. All right. Any questions? Well, let's move on to the next slide. Does anyone have any questions about this? I covered a lot in probably a pretty quick amount of time.
Yeah, we did get a couple of questions in the chat that I'll just share out, and then others, please feel free to raise additional questions in the chat or click to raise your hand and we'll call on you. Russ was asking, thus far, what are the types of IET pathways that have emerged throughout the state which haven't yet appeared to show strong IET promise? You know, and I realized in my chat I didn't talk about that second question. So Julie, what I said initially was, to date, healthcare careers like certified nursing assistant seem to be a top area where ABE programs have been able to develop IETs. But we have also seen IETs develop in the manufacturing sector, in hospitality, in IT, and education sectors. What else would you add about where it succeeded and maybe where there's been struggles?
I think you hit the nail on the head. That is where they've been. Healthcare has been the number one, and I think that's a good area to focus on because there is such a need and a demand for healthcare workers in Minnesota. I also think that there has been a lot of what are like test prep IETs around Parapro, CDL, maybe I'm forgetting some of the others, maybe child certificate. And I think we're offering those because learners do want those, but also because of that difficulty we mentioned of sometimes working with an instructor or a trainer from another institution or another training partner we can do within ABE. And I think that's fine, but we really want to and need to expand on that model and start working with instructors in our community and technical colleges, employers, and other training providers in the communities we're in. So thank you for that question. That's a good question. Yeah.
And then another question came in from Kimberly. Would you agree that interviewing and completing an application falls under employability skills as an example? And I said that definitely, to me, that falls under workforce preparation. It might not, and that would fall under that area. Do you agree, Julie?
Yes, I do. But keep in mind, yes, that is workforce preparation. But again, workforce preparation is broad and also it needs to scale down. So that might be a good activity that you will build into an IET program, but there will have to be more components of it throughout the entire program. But that does, yes, that is a part of workforce preparation.
And we'll take one more question before we move on. But the next question is from Kimberly. Can you share examples of where we should focus? I'm assuming on developing IETs. And I'll give an initial response to, and then Julie, I'd like any additional responses you'd have. The best, like where if I were thinking about developing an IET, I would take a look as an adult education program at your local or regional workforce development plan. And in that plan with your workforce development partners, what have been the sectors or the careers that have been identified as a top priority or a high need career or sector in your area? And also, as you look at that, think about what employer partners might you have? What training partners might you have? What post-secondary partners might you have? And really think about where you can make the magic happen. Where do you have those right partnerships? And where are there in-demand careers that you can find from your local or regional workforce development plan that can help you identify like pathways that might be successful, partners that might be willing to work with you, and pathways that will help learners actually get to that other side of the river and get into well-paying jobs that help them sustain their families. That's how I would start, is through the plan and looking at the partners that you have available. Julie, what else would you, or anything else you'd add?
I would just say ditto. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think that's actually what the federal regulations ask us to do. Like we need to, with all our grants, we have to submit them to the local workforce development boards for them to read through them and sort of give approval. So they want to work with us, especially the majority of the boards are made up of employers. So they would have good contacts, and I can help people get in contact with them. Sometimes it can be a little like overwhelming to oh, I'm going to go talk to the board. So trade organizations, and also each board has an ABE representative on the board. So maybe talking to them first about your needs or wants, and then asking them to ask the question at a board meeting. Just an idea, but totally agree with you, Brad. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's move on. I'll answer Kathleen's question in the chat, but let's move.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, moving on to the value of the IET delivery model. And I think I'm going to move through this pretty fast. Next slide, please. Okay, so it is the model of the future. We are receiving a lot of push federally. And I'm not just going to say IET, but it's the adult career pathways. It's working with employers, training individuals, and getting them into employment or education is really a big push. It also gives students a sense of direction, and it moves them into sustainable wage employment, which is a big part of it. And it fulfills the need in our community, and it helps out employers who are currently desperately in need of trained employees. Next slide. So the benefits to students: build confidence, familiarity with industry-specific terminology, using language in real-life situations. I won't read through all of these, but learners, the research shows that if learners are engaged, and they're more engaged when it's contextualized, and they will get a certificate or a credential at the end, they stay longer as well. Next slide. The benefits of IET to programs. It's expanding program knowledge as well, in that you get to work with another system, another education system, and I'm speaking of the Minnesota State Community College system or community partners. It helps to focus the lesson because it's very specific what industry you're preparing them for. And again, helps with student persistence, retention, and level gains, which we're always looking at our data and our measurable skill gains, et cetera, et cetera. And programs using federal ABE funds for student training must be in an IET format. Next slide. And then obviously it's a benefit to employers and the community. Job seekers are more prepared. Employers are able to showcase why they have a good place to work, and they fulfill employment gaps, etc. It also assists employers with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. 82% of adult basic education learners across Minnesota are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Next slide, please. So this is just a quote from one of the providers or one of the programs that offers IET. And this is a quote from someone who works in hospitality, an employer, about the good programming that they're offering and how well prepared the learners are that come to that graduate out of that program and they employ. Next slide. All right, onto the IET approval form, which is in what is needed in order to get an integrated education and training program approved through our state office. So that's where there's a link of where you can find it. And you need to have it approved first before you can go into SID. And SID is the Student Information Database, before it can be marked as IET. Next slide, please. This is what the form looks like. And there is an instruction form that goes with it. If you're not ready to dig in deep on this form and you just kind of want to know, is this an IET or not? There's a quick checklist that's probably 7 questions that you can just go through and answer. And if you answer a certain percentage of it, say it's probably like, yes, you have an IET, then move on to the approval form. And so we just ask for contact information, the career and credentials they get, partners and support, and then describing the IET is like the first part of the form. The second part of the form on the next slide includes the single set of learning objectives. And it also includes now, like, what is the TABE or CASA's reading score and math score that you're looking at? Like, what range are you looking at to serve in this IET? And then we ask for a timeline, intensity, and other activities. This is a single set of learning objectives. Next slide. So this is the process that we use. So program staff would complete the form, email it to this address. Then the state team reviews it along with Atlas to determine if all the criteria are met, and then we document that feedback. We share the evaluation in feedback with program staff. And then if it doesn't meet all the criteria and the program wants to get it as an IET, you can go back and repeat steps 2 and 4. Next slide, please. And so just so you know, the team reviewing it, that completes the feedback form will give an overall rating. We try urgent issues to clarify or fix. You'll get that. We'll try to call that out of reviewing the form. Any questions we may have, we'll ask about, and then any additional feedback we have, we'll give you about the form. If it is not initially approved, the program can respond to those questions and resubmit for approval. Once you receive final approval, mark it in SID and start counting the hours as IET hours. Next slide, please. I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Julie.
Yeah.
And let's now actually dive into one specific example so you can see what does this look like in practice. So I'm going to share one specific example with you. I want to give a shout out and a thanks to the International Institute of Minnesota and for helping to frame out this example. So the IET in particular is about a dietary aid program and for a dietary aid position. The full adult career pathway here falls under the hospitality careers. So as I said before, this is from the International Institute, and thanks to Lynn Thomas for helping to provide this information. A little bit of background about International Institute. It's a community-based organization that is part of our adult education community and part of a member of the St. Paul Community Literacy Consortium. International Institute has a long history, more than 100 years of focusing on adult career pathways and career training, as well as education. So this is, I'm really glad that we're able to highlight this example. Here you can see a little bit more information about this the hospitality careers pathway. And in particular, you'll notice that International Institute has really thought about this as, especially for someone who might be new to Minnesota, new to the United States, an immigrant or a refugee. So many of them, they've noticed that what's helpful about the hospitality careers pathway is that they frequently does not require a high level of English or necessarily previous experience, which might make it a good fit for a first career here in Minnesota. And it can help, this pathway can help overcome barriers to employment and help advance in the careers. And it's important to know that this pathway includes the dietary aid training that we'll dive into more, but there's also professional leadership training to help build a career where students can earn a sustainable salary living. And this dietary aid class in particular talks specifically about food safety, infection control, special diets, patient orders, dialogues with patients, American foods, customer service practices, and practical experience serving and communicating with the elderly. So first, let's break down and highlight some of those IET features that Julie shared with us. One is that an IET needs to combine adult education and literacy, workforce prep, and the career or sector training. And so some of the things that really are brought in from each of those sectors, with adult education and literacy, we see English language instruction brought into this program. From the workforce prep side, we see some computer skills instruction that's happening so that they can succeed in their career and in many other careers. Because the workforce prep, what makes that different than the career or sector training is that these are workforce skills that are generally needed to succeed in almost any job. And then next, dietary aid career-specific training, and we'll dive into that a little bit more as we go forward. Another feature of IET is that's part of a career pathway. And as we've already identified, this is the credentials and skills earned in this dietary aid program help people in the hospitality sector. However, it doesn't end there. These skills can also help build or stack into supervisory roles, nursing roles, environmental services, and other types of careers. Another IET feature that Julie hit on is sufficient intensity and quality. And so this program they've tweaked this program for a while, and what it is and what they've ended with that seems to fit that sufficient intensity and sufficient quality is a 4-week online training with 3 days in person for practical experience. And the skills, and we've already talked about that, those skills can convey into other sectors as well. Another feature in IET that we've discussed is the SSLOs, or that single set of learning objectives. And this is an example of an SSLO, is that students will be able to decode abbreviations and industry-specific terminology to determine meaning, specifically for the dietary aid or hospitality sector. And then you see that they're connecting with the adult education standards through the CCS reading, hitting reading anchors 1 and 4. Those are also taught through this program. And a little bit more about the SSLOs, but this is really not the session to break down SSLOs, but that single set of learning objectives, one of the objectives should really kind of be a meta goal that integrates what's the adult education or literacy or academic skill that's being taught, and what is the connected workforce preparation skill, and ultimately what is the career specific knowledge or the career experience or the career specific skills that are being taught. So you might actually start with those career specific skills and then kind of tie in, like, what is the literacy that needs to be brought in from, like, say, CCRS? What's additional workforce prep that needs to be brought in for a student to do that well on the job? So starting with those career specific skills and then adding and thinking, what are the adult education skills needed? What are the workforce prep skills needed? And adding those in and helping to detail that. Hopefully that can help you see kind of how that SSLO is built kind of a sum of the other 3. And let's dive into that career specific. I told you I was going to dive into that as part of this example. So we talk about an IET needing to have contextualized, occupationally relevant, or even directly from the employer types of materials. And so here you can see they did get one from the Shalom Nursing Home, where this is a sample meal ticket, and they have to break this down, and they teach, like, the reading skills. How do you actually even read this? And what does this mean? So breaking out, one of the things you'll see on that you saw in that meal ticket, they had a lot of abbreviations. And so they're building in, how do you read those abbreviations? Like, what does, I won't even get all of these, but what does OZ stand for? That's ounce, and FL, I think, is fluid. And so there's a lot of things like that they need to learn. And these are probably things that I could learn. I would not be able to succeed as a dietary aid yet, because I don't know all of these abbreviations or utilize these same abbreviations. They also, another way that they bring in career specific, if you saw in that meal ticket, they talked about nectar thick. And I would not know what nectar thick is, but here, one of the things that they teach in the dietary aid class is the levels of thickening fluids from thin to pudding thick. And they bring in a lot of industry specific terminology, like dysphagia, to kind of talk through this. So very contextualized knowledge being taught here, and the literacy skills are being taught in addition to the career specific terminology. So some excellent information here. Also, just think about how rich that those employer specific materials can be. They can provide a lot of important information about how to do things on the job that can be really tough to decipher. And maybe on the job, you might not have a ton of time, or they might not have a ton of patience for explaining that. And that's why it's important to have that built into our IET. Another piece that's really important to build into the IET is hands-on practice whenever possible. So we talked about 3 days on site. Here's an example of what that looks like on site. So maybe the person in the middle there is actually trying to develop that nectar thick liquid. And so and you can see that how that looks in the class or on the job itself in that on the on-site training, which is really excellent. And it helps connect with the employers, which is also a helpful bridge. Another feature for IET is wraparound services, acknowledging that we're not just able to meet the academic needs of our students, but we need to think about our students holistically and think about what wraparound services we could benefit from, or they could benefit from. So talk about those wraparound services like job search, and readiness learning, financial coaching, other types of wraparound services, maybe with healthcare or transportation, post-class employment navigation even. So there's a lot of information that they're trying to wrap around and ensure that students are supported in many different ways throughout that IET. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that ABE has to pay for all of those wraparound services. This is where the partnerships come in really handy. How can you work with maybe nonprofits or other types of organizations to support families? How can you work with the financial industry for the financial coaching? Thinking about other partners that you can bring in to help with those wraparound services is really important because it benefits those other programs as well as your adult education programs in helping learners sustain and also making sure that they get across the river and they don't fall off those stepping stones. A couple of key resources that we would like to share to make sure that you have handy, because we've only really skimmed the like even in this 50 minutes, we're skimming the surface to a degree. And so there's a couple key resources that Marisa is going to share in the chat. First is our Adult Career Pathway Library. There's a lot of information there, including curriculum resources and things like that about how you could develop career pathway programming or how you could just take and copy. I mean, that's really kind of a very common system here in Minnesota adult education. We really share, we copy and share, not steal, we share. And it's important that we work together and that we collaborate with one another as adult education programs, because we should never have to start from scratch, hopefully, with this work now, because there have been others that have been doing this. There's a lot of curriculum that's out there that we can adapt and work with. In addition, we have the IET Toolkit, which really provides things like the checklist that Julie mentioned before. Like if you really want to go in depth, like what is IET and how do I know specifically that I have something that's IET? In this IET Toolkit, there is a resource including that checklist from the feds that has, it's multiple pages of, do you have this and you must have this, and it talks about the statutory backing and everything that way. And so it's a very detailed checklist. So I'd encourage you to check out the toolkit, and specifically if you want to know, is this IET, check out that checklist. Thank you, Marisa, for getting that in the chat. So now let's open it up to questions. I know there's been some questions in the chat. Julie, do you want to kind of help me with what's been going on in the chat? Julie, you're muted.
Thank you. There's just been a few questions that I've responded to. One of them is regarding, let's see, can you clarify if a participant in an IET program would need to be enrolled in concurrent courses such as ESL or ABE class, workforce prep type class, and then a training situation, or can that all be one course that covers all 3 sections?
And you responded?
Yes, and my response was preferably it is one course. And the reason I say preferably is because it would be more convenient for the learner to participate in one course. However, there are some IETs where they offer all components separately. The catch there is that they have to be offered concurrently. So you can't have a learner enroll in a 4-week workforce prep class and then take the training piece. Concurrently is the key piece around IET, and the reason they're emphasizing the importance is because time is the enemy of adult learners. They do not have the time to stay in adult basic education, and then oftentimes they transfer to post-secondary where they are in developmental education, and then once they complete that, they can go into a college program. The idea here is we are shrinking that timeline, and but it doesn't mean we're cutting them short. It means we're combining skills that don't have to be done sequentially. They can be done and offered together.
Absolutely. And I would say there's another challenge if they are separated out as concurrent courses, sometimes it can be a little harder to actually make that programming feel integrated and truly seamless. And I think that and it might be a little tougher to make sure that you're all on the same page if you have different instructors in different classes that aren't actually regularly working together.
Yep. And then we had another question about, to what degree is documentation of an IET similar to one being considered by an area available as a starting point for the ABE and workforce partner to use? And if I'm understanding that correctly, I think, and this is maybe just something that, because we're at the state office and we receive kind of our marching orders from the federal office, and then we've put that down onto like ABE programs or consortium, that you're responsible for completing the IET form and turning it into us. But Russ has asked this question, which really kind of made me think about it. It might be a great idea to take that form and complete it and do it in collaboration with your training partner, so they understand all the pieces that you are, or ABE programs are required to meet in order to be tracked as integrated education and training.
Yep. And I would just add to that, I totally agree with what you're saying, Julie. And it's also important to know that IET is one thing that we might be doing with our workforce training partners, but we probably are doing at the local level, you're doing a wide variety of other things that maybe don't fall in that IET bucket as well. And those other things are also extremely valuable. So not everything you're doing with your workforce development partners falls into the IET bucket, but it could be. And sharing that documentation could help really ensure that you're on the same page. Yeah.
If I may, Russ here, what I was sort of trying to get at is, that single set of learning objectives can be kind of difficult to or challenging to arrive at.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of thinking that if someone had the benefit of someone else that worked really, really hard on that, as a way to say, oh, let's use that as our sort of starting point, and see how that relates to what we're trying to do locally, and not have to go through all that angst about how you pull that off. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot of great work in the southeast region of the state to develop some example SSLOs and really help us and help Atlas understand how does it what does this look like? And also Department of Corrections has been doing some outstanding work in this area. And so kind of utilizing those two examples with their collaboration with Atlas, Christine and Patsy have done a session on how to develop SSLOs. We'll see that session repeated here in the future. And also, I think it's going to change our documentation. And I could see another evolution of our form where maybe the SSLOs are really almost more documented as a chart. Like the SSLO is in the left column, and maybe the other skills are in the other column kind of next to it, kind of helping to break it down a little bit more, and sharing those examples so that you don't have to recreate the wheel. but I would just do one key caveat that does not escape you from having that conversation with the partners and having that discussion, like, does this really meet our needs? Do we need to add something else? Is there something else you're expecting? Because the conversations and that collaboration with the partners is it's what's essential. And so we don't just, it's like, just by giving you the answer, it doesn't mean the work is done. You still need to have the conversation. You still need to make sure you're on the same page.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, totally agree with that. Great question, Russ. I think that our hope or our plan is to have these where people can access them, because you don't want to spend a lot of time recreating the wheel. So if someone's offering a CNA at one program and another program wants to offer it, they can take that and work with the employer in their region, the training provider in their region, because it does change locally. I mean, you have your state content, which in order to, what I mean is you have your licensing content, which is required of all programs. But then you also have your local employers that say, well, we really want them to have this too, or could you emphasize this, or we're seeing people who don't know about this. So yeah, good idea. And we're working on it. We want to get those available so people have access to them, just like you have access to the adult career pathway curriculum, and you can share that with employers, share that with partners, and say, well, this is something that's been done. What do you think of this? Or what needs improvement? Or how could we tailor that to your needs?
Any other questions? Okay. One thing we'd love to hear from everyone, now that you've participated in this session, please share in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and share. But like, we'd love to hear, what is one takeaway that you have about IET after this session? Hopefully there's something that you're taking away that you can kind of think about, bring back to your team, debate, maybe do some extra brainstorming or strategizing. Share with us, what is a takeaway that you have after this session? Oh, Tracy, that makes me very happy that it seems more doable. I'm glad that some of that mystification can be eroded, because it does feel really tricky. I mean, Julie, for us in the state, we had a lot of time debating this and really thinking and trying to wrap our brain around, okay, what are the feds actually asking for here? What is needed? And we're not getting very clear information from the feds. And so that's been a big challenge. Good. People saying it seems more understandable, the alliteration, concurrent and contextual, excellent. And the concrete example, excellent. So Russ is asking a final question for our group. What states have emerged as leaders in this area? So in the opening session, we talked about Washington State and IBES being a leader in this area. I would also, though, say that I think Minnesota is going to be emerging here quickly as a leader in terms of developing SSLOs. I think some of the training that we're offering here seems to be actually fairly excellent. Some of the coaching where we might be emerging as a leader in that SSLO area, because admittedly the feds have not had a lot of training in that SSLO area available yet. Julie, what else would you say?
I think as far as delivering this from two different systems, Minnesota is doing a fantastic job. I think Wisconsin's doing really well but they're in the college system. And well, Texas, I was going to say Anson, but they're more focused on not necessarily training providers, but working with workplaces and employers to offer this. And that is because of the support from Atlas. That's because of all of your amazing work. So thank you all for all of your work today. It's been hopefully a helpful session for you. Thanks, Julie, for being a partner in this session. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.